Welcome to the Fantasy Throwdown Podcast. The Fantasy Throwdown Podcast. Bringing you the latest from the world of daily fantasy sports and gambling, so you can stop Googling how to join a squid game to cover all those parlays you thought were such a sure thing. Now, sit back and listen to one of the sharpest minds in the game. Here's your host, Dwayne Callender.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Throwdown Podcast. I'm your host, Dwayne Callender. Getting right into it because we have March Madness right around the corner, but we got more free agency news, and we'll get to the NFL, but a quick update with baseball. We just had a signing by the Yankees, bringing back Anthony Rizzo on a 2-year, $32 million deal. So that takes them out of the Freddie Freeman free stakes. And the bidders are dropping off because, again, I talked about this before about why you had the lockout. Because you got teams making business decisions and they do not care. Case in point, Freddie Freeman, the face of the Atlanta Braves, has been phased out of Atlanta. The Braves trading 4 prospects, including Christian Pache, to the A's for Matt Olson, who people were linking to the Yankees the entire time. The reason why I didn't buy it, because the Yankees haven't pulled off one of those trades for a young infield player in quite some time. They did the Gallo trade, and it still wasn't at any time big-time prospect, because Gallo was already going to be making money in arbitration. The Rangers were essentially trying to dump Gallo, which, you know, the Yankees took him off their hands, and of course they made the Donaldson trade, which I'm not going to get into again because we've been talking about it for a couple of days straight now. But, you know, that's why I didn't really buy the Olsen talk. But Atlanta gave up a number of quality prospects, to the degree that I couldn't see the Yankees making that commitment, because that's just not how the Yankees have been operating lately. They've been trying to ride the wave of grinding out some of these well-established players, even if they are past their prime, and then sprinkling in younger players as they start breaking down. So the Kiner Khalifa, I can't believe the Yankees are actually viewing him as a starting major league shortstop for a contending team. To me, it's baffling. It is absolutely baffling that the plan is to go with Ian Kiner Khalifa as the starting shortstop to begin the year. I think it's insane, to be perfectly honest. I've watched enough Rangers games over Texas Rangers, by the way. Of course, I watched the Rangers hockey team, of course, but the Texas Rangers, in a hitter's ballpark, even before they made the move from Arlington, Khalifa couldn't hit. He cannot hit on a consistent level against a premier team, and you're putting him in the AL East with, honestly, better teams than he was dealing with out west. I just think this is baffling. We'll see how it works out, but we're going to get some boo birds in the Bronx when it comes to him at the plate. The guaranteed on that one, because there's no way he should be viewed as a starting shortstop. And that seems to be the plan. They're going to still try to make, Gleyber Torres at short a platoon option. I mean, this is just, you were better off leaving the status quo than what the Yankees did, in my opinion. Because now the Yankees are banking on Donaldson somehow reversing Father Time and putting up numbers that are more reminiscent of where he was 4 years ago at the age of 36. It's bad optics, to be honest. I don't get the valuation whatsoever. But, you know, they're running it back with Rizzo. I don't have an issue with Rizzo, but, you know, again, you did a trade and DJ LeMahieu is out in the ether, like no position to really go to, floating around, and they say they're going to sprinkle him here and sprinkle him there. Like, it's 162 games. He's got to play. He's got to be playing somewhere in the infield. Using DJ LeMahieu in a DH role is utterly insane. And that's where the Yankees seem to be kind of stuck, because you should be playing Rizzo every day at first. Obviously, Voigt's out the window at this point, but there's less room on the Yankees to move around guys. And unless you're DHing Donaldson and having, again, you don't want to be playing Stanton too many games in the field. Judge is injury prone. The Yankees have got a bunch of holes, and they still don't have left field resolved. So, again, I talked about this yesterday with the Winker being thrown into the Suarez salary dump, how that was far more beneficial to the Yankees than what they actually did over the weekend. And it just looks worse, because now that again, I'm not saying I dislike bringing back Anthony Rizzo, but you got less seats at the table, and there's a lot of inflexibility on that roster right now. So we'll see. We shall see. I just look at it. It's bad roster construction whenever you have pieces that cannot be interchangeable and you've got an aging roster that is not getting any younger. So it is what it is. But that is the latest update. The Braves not only traded for Matt Olson, signed him to an 8-year, $162 million extension, I believe. But the case in point being, Matt Olson's going to be making more money than Ronald Acuna and Albies over the average of his contract. Again, this is why people were up in arms about the Acuna and Albies extensions, because they signed way too low of an extension deal. It was a terrible offer by their agents. They did a terrible job. Yes, they got money, but they are so well underpaid for what the market actually bears for their skill sets. And now Matt Olson just comes in from Oakland, making more than they do. And yes, Matt Olson's a nice player. Acuna and Albies are way more valuable than Matt Olson. It's not even close. And he's making more than they are per year. I'm just saying, it's just one of those things where your agency representation is of the utmost importance, and knowing your value, you gotta know it. When you're ever doing something in life, you gotta know your value. And yes, they took the safer route of guaranteeing money up front, but long term, those deals are gonna bite them when they look back on how much money they left on the table. There's no question. There's no question. There's very little that Acuna and Albies can say at this point, other than they signed deals that were well below their market value. But yeah, the Braves took a cheaper option in Olson than what they would have paid for Freeman. They're paying less per year than what they probably would have ended up doing for Freddie Freeman. Yes, he's the face of the franchise. The fans want him back. But at the end of the day, organizations are going to make decisions in their best interest. And sports fans have, they keep not learning this lesson in the fact that they do this all the time. And then they blame the players when the players look out for their best interests. It's like they're grown adults. You got to be able to make your own decisions. And Freeman's going to get paid more in the tail end of his career. And the Braves are going to move on with a cheaper option who's younger. It is what it is. And Olson's a hometown guy anyway to the Atlanta area. So it'll work. It should work out. But I'm sure Braves fans would have rather had Freddie Freeman there for the entirety of his career. But hey, that's the way it breaks sometimes. It doesn't always work out that way, but he at least got him a title. So let's get to the NFL story I want to talk about. The Dallas Cowboys and free agency debacles. I love talking about the Cowboys when it comes to this, because Jerry Jones, it's always fun. It's always fun. So the latest debacle is the fact that Randy Gregory, who has been suspended multiple times by the NFL for substance abuse violations, mostly tied. Well, basically, it's all been tied to marijuana. Let's just be honest. But he's been suspended multiple times, up for free agency. Had a solid enough year for the Cowboys, putting up numbers. I didn't think it was that much of a priority bringing him back. Just with the amount of issues the Cowboys had overall collectively, paying for Randy Gregory didn't make a ton of sense. But the issue was DeMarcus Lawrence, who is the Cowboys' best player on defense, took a pay cut to ensure that the Cowboys had enough money to bring back Randy Gregory. That was already established. So DeMarcus Lawrence took the pay cut to get Randy Gregory re-signed. Jerry Jones personally negotiated the Randy Gregory deal to bring him back to the Cowboys. And the original terms of the deal, basically the deal Randy Gregory had was a 5-year, $70 million contract that he agreed to with Jerry. So $28 million guaranteed. What happened? Stephen Jones, Jerry's son, who technically has a vice president or president role within the Cowboys, it's very confusing. Jerry supposedly has the final say, but Stephen oftentimes contradicts his own father and sabotages deals, like what happened in this case, because he thinks Jerry's going overboard. So what does Steven do? Steven starts tweaking the guaranteed money on the back end after Randy Gregory already agreed to re-sign with the Cowboys, and the bonus money. Gregory's camp gets wind of this. His agent flips out. Gregory's pissed off because technically he did have other offers. They didn't say who made the offer, but it was probably the Jags. In terms of signing a new deal than what he had agreed to with the Cowboys. So according to them, he gave up money. And so he backed off the deal and signed with the Denver Broncos in the same day for the same 5-year, $70 million contract, $28 million guaranteed that he agreed to Jerry Jones. Jerry now is fuming because Randy Gregory just left for the same amount of money that he had agreed to with Jerry just previously. They were drawing up the paperwork until Steven got involved. So it looks like the Cowboys went back on their word, which is exactly what happened because Steven didn't like the deal and Jerry didn't run it by him because Jerry does whatever he wants. He owns the team and he's not going to fire himself. So they are in complete disarray. Gregory signs with the Broncos. The Cowboys are now in a spot where they may need to pay more up front for Von Miller on a short-term deal because they actually do need a pass rush. And DeMarcus Lawrence is pissed because he gave up more money to bring back Gregory when he didn't need to because it looks like Stephen Jones had different plans anyway. Love the Cowboys being as dysfunctional as they are. You gotta love it. And, as I'm saying this, there's also talk now of rumblings that Baker Mayfield's getting traded. A lot going on this NFL offseason, but we will get into March Madness now because we're already almost 15 minutes in. So let's start breaking down these regions. So I'm actually going to start off with the region that I'm still thinking is pretty much straightforward. So we're going to start with the West region overall. And obviously we've got Gonzaga as the number 1 seed. Duke is the number 2 seed. So you've got Gonzaga and Duke up top. I'm not overly impressed with the region as a whole. You have some dark horses that I look at in terms of UConn. Memphis could be a problem. But I want to talk about the top 2 seeds first. So Gonzaga and Duke. Obviously, the West is supposed to be overall the weakest region. Hence, you have Gonzaga as the overall number 1 seed. Never thought Duke was a 2 seed, let alone the top number 2 seed. So them, well, technically they're the weakest number 2 seed, so they're the last number 2 seed to get in. Hence why they're matched up against Gonzaga. But be that as it may, never really viewed Duke as a 2 seed. And surprisingly enough, even though I didn't think this region was that tough, the data models that I'm looking at, so I'm looking at teamrankings.com. I'm looking at the Athletic and their swing shot model. The interesting part about this is the fact that Duke is the lowest ranked number 2 seed to make it to the Sweet 16 percentage wise, because Duke is just under 63% compared to the other number 2 seed. So obviously you've got Villanova, you've got Kentucky, and you have Auburn. Duke is the lowest ranked out of all 4 of them. So I thought that was interesting just because I'm not overly impressed by Duke's region, but even by a data model standpoint, the models are saying Duke isn't as nearly as much of a sure bet to make it to the Sweet 16, even in a weaker region. But on a percentage basis, the public, where the estimates are trending towards, you still have the public betting Duke to make it to the Sweet 16 at in excess of 80%. The most popular number 2 seed is Kentucky, because they have the Wildcats at nearly 88% advancing into the Sweet 16 based off of what the data is showing from the public. So the public is in love with Kentucky. Duke definitely is second in terms of the picks. But from a data model standpoint, when we're looking at the West itself, though, Duke, you got a variance, negative variance of actually making it to the Sweet 16 versus the public. And you're going to see that with the higher seeds. But Duke, it's a little bit more transparent seeing how much of a discrepancy it is compared to some of the others. So you're getting a wider range because they're as popular with the public versus the statistical odds from the data models of Duke making it. Now, that's not to say Duke can't make it, because obviously they still have over a 60% chance of making it into the Sweet 16. But as you start making your way into the Elite Eight in percentage odds wise, so you kind of look at it and say, where does it look for Elite Eight odds? You know, Duke, you're getting into the 47% range with the public, and their odds are still on the lower end, because you're seeing the data models support the fact that Duke isn't as favored for a deep run. Nova's not as favored for a deep run. So you have a ceiling cap in that regard. Now, again, I'm not in love with Texas Tech either. So it may be a case of early rounds. Yes, everyone's picking Duke, but as I stated before, I'm not in love with this region. And as fewer people begin to pick Duke and they'll start to deviate into that second weekend, Duke, while not a tremendous pick by any regard, having Duke becomes less of an issue as you get further into the tournament, because people are expecting Duke to make it to Sweet 16, and then you're going to start seeing upset bids, brackets, place Texas Tech in over Duke to begin with in the in that Sweet 16 going into the Elite Eight. Again, I look at it from the standpoint of, if you're looking at Texas Tech and as the 3 seed, and we'll talk about the Red Raiders. I mean, Texas Tech, And again, you look through all the defensive metrics, Texas Tech is, in my opinion, the best defensive team in the tournament. It basically boils down to that much. However, I will say, though, that in terms of their style of play, the adjusted defensive efficiency, they're number one in KenPom rankings. The area that I kind of get worried about with Tech is the fact that they're 211th in tempo. And Houston's another team where, again, low tempo teams, and that's 211 out of like 300 plus teams. So you get into these situations where I have a little bit harder time adjusting the teams. See, if they were a little bit more efficient on offense, I wouldn't worry nearly as much. UCLA has this issue too, where they're a low tempo team, but they're both efficient on offense and defense. We'll get to UCLA in coming up in a future region breakdown, but I look at Texas Tech as a case where, yes, statistically, you definitely rank them higher than Duke. So, in terms of a potential matchup down the road, I would still lean more towards Texas Tech over Duke, even though I'm not necessarily in love with Texas Tech. But again, this depends on your scoring format, because at the end of the day, you're going to start needing to nail down these Elite Eight picks and get them right. I think you're still getting a big percentage of the public banking on either an early upset for Duke, so they'll take Michigan State over Duke, and it's not as though Duke can't get knocked out. I mean, I just told you, Duke has a is just over 60% chance, according to the data models, of making it to the Sweet 16. So it's not out of the realm possibility that Michigan State knocks them out, because they're given a little bit under of a 25% chance of winning that game against Duke. So it is a legit upset possibility. And depending on your format and where you're playing, you may even get a higher percentage of people calling for that Michigan State upset. So, if you got Michigan State alumni in your brackets, you have a kind of good sense that, you could have more than 20% of the pool picking Michigan State over Duke. And it wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world to then just go with the team that's still expected to win in Duke and try to head off the competition that way. So you're constantly gauging who's in your pool, what's your scoring format, how many brackets you're playing. Because in this region, I could see Duke getting to the Elite Eight, and I could see Texas Tech getting to the Elite Eight. The teams that I have a difficult time wrapping my arms around are Alabama and Michigan State, because I think from just a statistical standpoint, Alabama is one of the more susceptible teams, in my opinion, of getting bounced in the first round. They were 19-13 on the year. They were one of the least impressive defensive teams coming into the tournament. In terms of how they got in based off of a strength of schedule consideration in the rankings of how many tough opponents they play. But I would also beg to argue that they got beat by most of the tougher teams that they played. So it makes it a little bit harder to digest Alabama, because I think they're going to be facing similar competition level in the winner of Rutgers Notre Dame, where, again, depending on your scoring format, if you're doing value on top of the seed or you're doing multiplication, you may be backed into a corner where you need to be picking some upsets in this region. And the upset people have been gravitating towards is Vermont over Arkansas. The issue with Alabama is the 6 seed versus the playing game winner of Rutgers Notre Dame. Arkansas is the 4 seed. People are the popular pick has been leaning towards going the Vermont side of things. Now, here's where we gotta look at the numbers. Depending on the data model you're looking at, you're going anywhere from a 30 to 33% chance of an upset by Vermont. Now, depending on the format of your contest, that in of itself is worthy of consideration from a value theory standpoint of getting the upset points if you're adding the seed, or better yet, multiplying the seed. I would say if you're multiplying the seed times the round value, Vermont makes a ton of sense. Mainly because you still have a couple of big dudes in the interior, where you got Ryan Davis, who I believe was a transfer portal player that came in, but he's 6'8", 250 in the post. And Vermont's playing style, they take a ton of threes. They shoot over 37% from three-point range. Most of their field goal attempts, I believe it was 42% of their field goal attempts were from the three-point range. Now, those are signs where they like to stretch you out and take jump shots. Now, when you're playing Arkansas, the counterpoint to that is Arkansas loves to run. They like to get on the boards. They like to run. Eric Musselman's going to be pacing up and down the sideline like the madman he is as a coach. But they're going to be hustling. If Vermont is going to play as slow as they do, because they were 288th in pace, and they start missing their threes, Arkansas can get back in the game even if they're down. So this is one of those where I like the upset if we're doing this based off of additional value on top of the seed. If we're doing a standard build where you're just getting the 1 point for who the winner is, it's not nearly as advantageous, in my opinion, trying to chase the upset with Vermont, because I can see how this game goes, where if Vermont, again, they shoot well from 3-point range, but it's not as though they're absolutely going to shoot the lights out of the building. It's like, they're still shooting 37%, but it's still 37%. When you have a team along the lines of an Arkansas that's, I want to say it's either top 3 or top 4 in terms of overall tempo, and they're actually kind of crashing boards, I don't necessarily love the pace of matching up a team that plays slow against a team that wants to run up and down the court. That's where I get a little bit worried about. The Vermont upset pick, because I could see how Arkansas takes care of business against Vermont if Vermont doesn't shoot at an incredible clip to justify it. So this is one of those where, yes, I definitely could see the upset happening. It's just one of those where it's a specific win condition for Vermont that I could certainly take a couple of stabs on, but I'm not going to go too crazy over the actual pick itself. The line of the game itself, though, is still which it has the line at like 5.5. So again, it's not a huge spread. So don't get me wrong. It's just one of those where I kind of look at it and say, you have other upset picks that are going to be playing that day. And again, we'll get to them in some of these other regions where it's a tighter spread. So you could make a case where, that UConn game, again, not necessarily saying it because I actually like UConn, but if we're going by spread pick, they're only a 6.5 point favorite over New Mexico State. So again, a lot of folks have been talking up the Arkansas getting upset, but if you're looking at the spread, UConn is pretty much in the same boat as Arkansas. So, it's a 5-12 matchup for UConn. So, folks love betting on those 5-12 matchups. It's just interesting that in terms of upset plays, there's been far more talk on Arkansas getting upset by Vermont than UConn getting upset, even though the spread is very similar. UConn, data model wise, it's rating out to 75% chance of advancing. Arkansas just under 66%. But if you're looking at the public percentages of how the picks are going, you'll see the public is backing both teams at a similar clip. So it depends on how much you value trying to get an edge early over your competition. Because if it were me, I'm looking at this, depending again on the scoring format of the bracket, but I'm leaning this more towards, okay, we've got a decent chance of Vermont pulling off an upset on Arkansas. UConn should be in pretty good shape against New Mexico State. If you match Vermont up against UConn, based off of looking at some of the hypothetical matchups of UConn versus a Vermont, realistically, this leans more towards UConn getting there about 2/3 of the time, about 67%, just a shade under that. So again, it's still you still got a shot with Vermont if you want to go deep with Vermont in a pool where you're going to bank in extra points for upset value. It just depends on your scoring format. Me personally, I do like UConn's odds moving forward into the Sweet 16. So I'm not as concerned about calling for upset bids, but if I'm taking a shot in the dark, Vermont is around a 15% chance of making it to the Sweet 16. So it depends on how much edge you're willing to visit, because outside of all the dark horse candidates, and even Memphis is just under a 14% chance of pulling off an upset against Gonzaga and get to the Sweet 16. Vermont's higher. If we're going off of a scoring format, Vermont's going to rack you up more points than a Memphis will, and Gonzaga's still the best team in this region. So to me, you can roll with a Vermont depending on your scoring format, and that is your best bet of getting different from brackets if you want to have a bit of a surprise in someone making it into the Sweet 16. Vermont at a 15% clip, that's worth rolling the dice, depending on your scoring format, if you can bank in that 13 seed value into your point total for 2 rounds. And you don't have to get that much different in some of your other bracket regions if you've got a Vermont into the Sweet 16. But that's the thought process of one way to go about it. I know folks were also talking up Davidson. The issue I see with Davidson, and again, data model wise, they graded out pretty well. They had a 14% chance of making the Sweet 16. Because you may not like Duke, it may make sense to call for that upset, but I'm telling you, a popular pick is going to be Michigan State upsetting Duke. And I don't necessarily like Michigan State all that much to feel that great about the pick. And if you're still going to get over 20% of public calling for that upset, because again, some folks are alumni. It will influence your pool. The bigger the name, the school. Michigan State historically gets more steam the larger your pool size is. The more you're going to see outliers. And Michigan State and North Carolina are amongst those outliers of teams that, even though they're underdogs in certain matchups, they're getting a ton of steam in terms of selection picks, and it influences your bracket pool. So it's always good to take a quality survey of who's in your pool and kind of know what if they're alumni, they got an affiliation with a particular school or lean for a particular school, and you can start kind of game planning how you're going to approach it. But the teams that I look at and to be under serious consideration, I would say you're looking at that Rutgers Notre Dame game, because I think they're both talented enough to pull off an upset on Alabama. And you're looking at Vermont for potential consideration on this, mainly because if you get that playing game winner over Alabama, I know I've talked about Texas Tech being a defensive squad, but sometimes they get into those offensive droughts and you can catch them. And it's just one of those things where you play a team that isn't great at scoring, and it's a back-to-back, because you always have to remember that second game is a less than 48-hour turnaround from you got the opening round jitters, you got that out of the way, you got a less than 48-hour turnaround to prep for a team that you haven't seen most likely all year long. And in scouting and everything else, the things that usually suffer the most are on the defensive end, because you're trying to make switches, you're trying to make defensive changes on a squad that you haven't really prepped hard for because you didn't know if you were going to play them or not. So to me, that's why I like backcourt play when it comes to NCAA tournament, and I like teams that have an ability to score without shutting the other team down defensively. Because yes, while you can shut down the team defensively, if you're struggling to score, it makes it that much harder for you to close out games unless you're an excellent free throw shooting team. And a lot of these teams are just not that. So it ends up becoming a little bit of a trickier situation. So again, depending on your scoring format, I'm looking at the playing game winner, the 11 seed, and I'm looking at Vermont, because you can get value out of those seeds with additional point total, and it's not necessarily going to crush you if you miss on them, just because of the point allocation in the early rounds. But my preference would be leaning towards Vermont, even though I could see Arkansas winning that game. It's worth a stab depending on the scoring format of your bracket. Now, in terms of the overall winner for the region, I'm still in the mindset of Gonzaga overall making it to the Final Four. They've got just under a 50% chance of making it out of the region. Next up, you got Texas Tech at just under 14%. Duke is actually below Texas Tech. And again, I talked about this. The KenPom rankings have Texas Tech above Duke. Duke's under 12%. And then it falls off after that. You got Arkansas well under 10%. I think they were under they're under 7%. You got UConn. And again, UConn's one of those interesting plays where, depending on how you want to build out your roster, if you're picking UConn for an upset over Gonzaga, you really don't need to be going crazy picking upsets in other regions. That's enough of a disruption to brackets, because Gonzaga is so popular again this year, that having them knocked out by UConn in a potential Sweet 16 matchup, that already gets you different enough that in most smaller pools, you're golden already because you're different and you've banked in points because you didn't get too crazy in the other regions while calling the big upset of the tournament in the Sweet 16 with the overall number one getting knocked out. So, again, food for thought as to how to approach building out your lineup for the West region. Again, end of the day, I still lean heavily towards Gonzaga, but it's not the craziest thing in the world having these alternatives being presented, because it does make a difference come your bracket selections as to how folks want to approach the thought process. But going chalk isn't the answer, but revisiting some of the prior concepts of what has worked in the past, I am very much in favor of it. So you're getting the value seed boost with some of these squads, and it kind of comes down to how these regions were arranged. This is a weaker region, but because it's a weaker region, you get some value out of the double-digit seeds making a run. And so I'd be looking at the playing game winner, and I'd be looking at Vermont as well. So we shall see how it all plays out. But that's my initial thoughts on the West region as a whole, and we will get to the remaining regions as well in upcoming episodes. But that does it all for now. Have a good one, folks, and best of luck to you in your tournament brackets.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Throwdown Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and all other major outlets.